case for Australia to return to Imperial Units and the impacts of metrication. The first instance of metric being legally recognised in Australia was on the 16th of April 1947 with the Chifley government, who signed the Meter Convention, which dates back to 1875 in Paris. The decision to convert to metric was done by the government through legislation of the Metric Conversion Act, passed on the 12th of June 1970. Unfortunately, the Australian people didn't have their say through means of a referendum, to which the Department of Technology, metrification in Australia, justified. This would have presupposed that people would have had a comparable knowledge of both imperial and metric systems and of the impact such a change might have. In other words, the people can't possibly educate themselves. They're dumb, they need the government to do their thinking for them. In an event where Australia stayed using imperial units, the arguments they provide are biased. Exports would have to be increasingly repriced and repackaged for sale to metric countries. Imports would be increasingly from metric countries would have to be repriced and repackaged or overprinted in imperial for use in Australia, where metric designations would be meaningless. Repair and maintenance of imported equipment, cars, etc. would become increasingly difficult, requiring special tools and special trade training. Manuals and instructions related to imported equipment would have to be converted for use by tradesmen, technical colleges, etc., or employees retrained to use them. News sent from overseas would tend to be less meaningful, as they would also need Australian news to be sent abroad. People travelling or working abroad need to obtain working knowledge of the metric system. Children being taught science at school and university would need to be taught the metric system to cope with overseas developments in technology. For much science, there are no imperial units, and teaching of electrical science would not be possible in imperial. Textbooks from overseas would generally be less useful than they are now, because they would be in the wrong units. Craft books from overseas would have little application here because they would not relate to Australian measurements and materials. Australia's main trading partner was overtaken by the UK to the US in the late 1960s. Australia announced metrification officially in 1974, a year before the US passed the Metric Conversion Act of 1975. So changing the measurement system to facilitate trade with a different trading partner, while a bad idea, didn't help Australia-US trade for at least a year. The argument could be made that Australia was trading with other countries that had officially adopted the metric system. But why is it that Australia's responsibility to change for other countries that they're trading with, but not the other way around? Australia made the switch on the 14th of February 1966, Valentine's Day. The day was called C-Day, which stood for Changeover Day. Unlike the UK, it was called D-Day, or Decimalisation Day. For 2 years after February 1966, Australia elected to use both kinds of money, dollars and cents, pounds, shillings and pence. Unlike the transition, which allowed both currencies to be used, it was practicable to maintain customers' accounts in two currencies simultaneously during the 2-year transition, as most branches in the 60s, apart from the first ones in Westpac, Sydney, were not yet computerised. On Tuesday the 1st of August 1967, pounds, shillings and pence were no longer accepted. Shopkeepers were required to only show the price in dollars and cents, marking the end of the transition period. Why is converting metric to imperial an argument against using imperial units when it's easier to do? Manuals and instructions from overseas are written in a myriad of languages, so we'd have to translate them too, as well as convert from metric to imperial. Numbers, while a universal language, don't make a difference when many countries conduct trade in both systems. America largely uses imperial units. American news reporters don't convert from metric units, typically distances. In 2012, Top Gear UK was the world's most watched show. They use miles. UK still uses miles in speech and on their roads, which leads me to believe that in an effort for Australia to appear to be a forward-thinking country by abandoning the metric system, it has been left behind by the two major world powers in terms of linguistics, as any understanding of imperial escapes the Australian conscience when travelling or migrating abroad. I watch the US Open every year in September, and have some degree of understanding what miles per hour means, as the average velocity of a tennis serve on the women's tour is about 100 miles per hour, which is 160 kilometers per hour. I also find that measuring one's body weight when measured incrementally in pounds can show a 1 to 2 pound difference that may not be visible when using metric scales. Weight loss can be discouraging if in kilograms it's only 2.2 pounds, as it takes less effort to lose 1 pound than it does for a kilogram. So we really could have lost 1 pound, it just might not show up on the scale. Australia still uses imperial in some contexts. When asked for a telescreen, it is often advertised in inches rather than centimetres. There are some leftover imperial weights and measures, like on the Puffington-Billy Railway, the speed limit is in miles per hour rather than kilometres per hour. Waist size for trousers is still recorded in inches. The main point I want to make against decimalisation and metric is that many slang is now considered foreign to Australia, even though it still exists in the United Kingdom. So it's just seen as a Briticism, or words only British people use. This is preserved in the UK because they didn't change their currency. Slang such as quid for pound survive, and bob survive from pre-decimal times. Words such as tuppence, and which was also known as twopence or threepenny piece, threepence, or the silver sixpence, the tanner, half crowns, are now no longer used. These metrics disappeared. So did the slang. Conversion rates between imperial and metric is like determining the average exchange rate between different currencies. No one's complaining about that. Why should it all be global? Why can't we be different from one another? Steve Hoban was subjected to criminal prosecution for selling bananas by the pounds rather than kilograms.
Who prosecuted Steve Thoburn, the greengrocer from the northeast, because he had the temerity to do that appalling thing, sell a pound of bananas rather than a kilo of bananas. This is the sort of society which we've come to in the modern world, but which now we have the freedom to depart from.
In summary, imperial units are more truly relevant to the human senses. Simply denying the practicality of imperial units because it's too complicated is just whinging over not using basic arithmetic. I refuse to live in a world where it's homogenized and boring and we all use the same currency, measurements, or whatnot. It's convenient to have precision. Imperial allows using a readily available source to measure with, your foot for instance. Metric made the choice to be easily convertible. Imperial made the choice to be easily relatable.